before, and it took him 4 years, from 1508 to 1512, and that was in the Sistine Chapel ceiling. But then back in 1537 he was actually commissioned by Pope Clement VII to create the Last Judgment, and that's the painting that stands on the wall. And in that he actually paints not really in a Renaissance style, but more in the very first terms of mannerism, and mannerism of course rising up throughout the later part of the Renaissance. But a spectacular painting in its own right. In that he actually has a self-portrait, and you'll see of St. Bartholomew being flayed alive, and you'll see Bartholomew holding his own skin in that, and the draping face of Bartholomew on the skin, the skin of Bartholomew is in fact a self-portrait of Michelangelo himself. But that's a bit about Michelangelo and the amazing history of the great man, and how he really did influence the world of art across the ages and going forward. But it was Raphael as well who was known to have intrinsic ability above and beyond Michelangelo, perhaps. If you have a look at some of his works, they are just phenomenal. And bear in mind as well that Raphael passed away at the age of only 37. Michelangelo lived to the age of 88, but Raphael only 37 years old. There's a lot of speculation as to how he died and why he died, but it was of a virus of some sort of illness that lasted only 15 days, and then he was gone in a flash like that. He had a huge school beneath him. He had 50 different pupils who were studying under him and working under him, many of which then went forward throughout the Renaissance to go and influence the rest of the Renaissance. But if you have a look inside the Vatican museums themselves, that's where you see a lot of the great works of Raphael. A lot of his later works, the latest work that he ever created was almost Baroque. In fact, it was the Transfiguration of Christ, and you can see that there is a real almost Baroque influence in the work, kind of pushing forward the ideals of the Catholic Church at the time. However, if you have a look at the works of Raphael in the stanza, the Vatican stanza, and you'll see basically the Vatican rooms, and throughout the papal palaces, you'll see just a phenomenal works of art. In fact, some 350 works of art created by Raphael and his school, essentially his students, the people who are working for him during that time. Of course, the quality drops off when Raphael was not actually touching the work, and you can actually see from one to the other when he was, well, the experts can see when he was painting and when some of his pupils were painting as well. But in that in the stanza, the most famous work amongst that is the School of Athens, and this work itself really defines the style that Raphael was painting in, but also defined the Renaissance in general, because it was the recapturing essentially of the ancient world, and essentially the Roman and Greek times, and going back to Roman sculpture, Greek sculpture, and the beauty that was put forward in there, the earthly presence of the art that was done at that time. It was a recapturing, a rebirth essentially of art and ideals in general, and that's what the whole Renaissance was about, a rebirth from the Middle Ages that had gone on for 1,000 years beforehand. But Raphael was instrumental, so was Michelangelo, in getting all of that done. But Michelangelo thought that Raphael was actually plagiarizing a lot of his work, and it's well understood that Raphael was allowed by Bramante into the Sistine Chapel in the middle of the night to see some of the works of the ceiling being painted by Michelangelo, and he has very much been influenced by Michelangelo in his works, and you can see that through some of the style of works of Raphael's later works. I think what's incredible is that Michelangelo actually accused him of plagiarism late in his life, saying that Raphael would have been nothing without having studied the works of the great man Michelangelo. Of course, you can see how the two went back and forth, and they obviously were great adversaries, but were pushing each other throughout those years to be favourites of the popes, of course, and also to be favourites of the patrons of the time as well. Well, that's a bit about Renaissance art, and a bit about two of the great three of the Renaissance. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, this is BlankCanvasTV.com. I'm Andre Knott, standing right here in St. Peter's Square in Vatican City. Make sure you stay tuned and tune in for another episode coming up.